From its purpose to its creators, to its impressive statistics. Join us as we explore the Christ the Redeemer statue in Rio de Janeiro. For the moment, let's consider statues and monuments in a more monumental meaning. They are made with a purpose each and every time, am I right? For instance, the purpose of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. is to honor President Abraham Lincoln and the freedom he granted to a great number of people while in office. That is a fairly clear meaning, and a valid one at that. However, there's some disagreement regarding the true significance of the Christ the Redeemer statue in Rio de Janeiro, because many people's perspectives differ greatly from one another. Of course, you could just glance at it and conclude, to some extent, that is accurate, yet meaning isn't always conveyed through construction. Some perceive Christ's stance on the cross and believe that the statue represents him in some way, just as he did when he was crucified, indicating that the statue commemorates the death of Christ, who rose from the dead and brought life to everyone by rising into heaven, giving the statue a highly sacred significance. Others, however, see Christ's arms as a representation of open arms, rather than as a position on the fabled crucifixion. Jesus emphasized these three things: love thy neighbor as thyself, love God and love people, and give to those in need. Therefore, a lot of people in Rio de Janeiro see it as a reminder to treat those who are close to them and those who enter their nation with kindness. That statue is really important for us in Rio and for the people in Brazil. It has several meanings, not only as a religious emblem, but also as a sign of hospitality, of open arms. It also implies that we are excellent hosts, a Brazilian resident stated. For the avoidance of doubt, there is no right or wrong response to the statue's meaning. Instead, this simply illustrates how confusing the statue's placement and construction is, which is all right. Sculptures are unquestionably works of art, and art is supposed to be interpreted freely. Alright, so we've gone quite deep into the possible meaning of the statue in relation to its location and other factors. Let's start with a simpler query. Why was it constructed in the first place? Given the statue is Christ the Redeemer and was probably constructed to showcase Brazilian religion, you might find this to be a strange question. That may have been the case for other nations, but Brazil's situation in 1920 was a little more nuanced. As you can see, the official founding of the Brazilian Republic in 1889 marked the beginning of it all. They kept church and state apart as part of the new republic, something that over the years numerous other nations have done. However, those who followed the Catholic faith, which was the most popular religion in Brazil, feared that many would stray from God and faith's path as a result of the split. Over time, their anxieties intensified, particularly after the outbreak of World War I. They saw an increase in godlessness at that time and decided they needed a statue to constantly remind them of their God and who was keeping watch over them. As a result, they engaged Heitor da Silva Costa in 1920 to create the statue that would stand over the city and serve as a constant reminder of Christ. You could argue that the Catholic Church's decision to erect a statue as a daily reminder was a little bit trivial, but keep in mind that their actions weren't motivated by selfishness. The statue was made as a reminder that there is a better path, one that doesn't involve dark ways, and they were just trying to make sure that everyone remembered that. And it succeeded in its intention, and as a result, one of the most adored statues worldwide is Christ the Redeemer, even though that wasn't how it started out at all. Statue makers go through a rigorous process, whether we realize it or not, to ensure that their upcoming statues are made correctly, look right, and convey the right message. Like many other fabled statues, Christ the Redeemer had a much different design. How was it going to appear? For the most part, the same. The largest alterations, however, were in the arms of the standing Christ, who was facing the sun and surveying the city, but more precisely, what he held within his arms. Though in the original design he held something in each hand, his arms eventually became empty. It was initially intended that he would be holding a globe in one hand and a cross in the other, the cross clearly being a sign of the crucifixion. The phrase, "he has the whole world in his hands," from the children's song also applies to the globe, giving the statue a very clear meaning as a result. The men in charge of the project were initially quite happy with this design. However, it acquired the moniker Christ with a Ball as they began to construct it. Since the details of the markings on the globe would not appear at a distance, that is certainly how it appeared. And from a distance is where the majority of Rio residents would see the statue. After consulting with another Brazilian artist, Heitor da Silva Costa created the arms open wide Christ the Redeemer statue. Let's take a moment to consider Christ the Redeemer. Consider how high above Rio de Janeiro it is. In case you're unaware, it's almost a half-mile upward via a mountain located inside the city. Once more, the purpose of the elevation was to make sure that everyone could see the Christ the Redeemer statue. However, as you are probably aware, the higher you ascend, the more challenges nature will present to you. Lightning is the issue in this instance. Christ the Redeemer is essentially a lightning rod, even though it wasn't made of metal, because it protrudes like a sore thumb and has the ability to draw lightning in its own unique way. Therefore, it shouldn't come as a huge surprise that it had multiple lightning strikes during its nearly 100-year lifespan. However, 2008 was by far one of the worst years. When a massive electrical storm hit Rio de Janeiro, lightning struck the statue, damaging its face and hands. Fortunately, the people were able to restore the statue to its former glory, even using the same material from the same quarry where the original building materials were taken. Given its magnitude and Brazil's weather patterns, this type of event is more likely to occur again. Before moving on, don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. Make sure to hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our weekly videos. Construction projects in the modern era are nothing compared to projects completed throughout history. Even in the 1920s, despite all the advances, many things were still done by hand. Major construction vehicles had not yet been completed, and even if they had, not everyone in the world possessed them. So it took a lot of time and a lot of effort to create the Christ the Redeemer statue in Rio de Janeiro, because, as previously stated, it was built on top of a mountain. The real issue for the creation of the Christ the Redeemer, however, was the distance and time. Heitor da Silva Costa designed the statue, but he had to travel to France to find a sculptor to make it a reality. He would find Paul Landowski, who would take the design, make his own version of the parts that would help make the statue, including some improvements and design, and then ship them to Brazil over the course of 9 years. Was it all done after that? Not exactly. He created the pieces using materials he had on hand in France. When they arrived in Brazil, they were remade into reinforced concrete pieces to withstand the weather and other issues. So, by the time the statue was finished, it had been nearly a decade since it had all started. As previously stated, reinforced concrete is used to construct a large portion of the statue. It's sturdy and dependable, and as previously stated, it's relatively simple to repair. However, what you see in the statue is not concrete, but rather a material known as soapstone. Well, why is this significant? Like the Statue of Liberty, they wanted the statue to feel lighter and more visible, as well as more visually pleasing. As a result, soapstone was employed. Here's the issue. They've been maintaining the Christ the Redeemer for nearly 100 years, and as a result, the soapstone from the quarry they've been using has officially run out of material. That is, they can't make it the same color that they had been doing so for the majority of its life. That's not to say it won't be coated in something else. It just won't be the same soapstone that gave it its current color. After its next renovation, the statue will most likely appear much darker than before. The Christ the Redeemer statue has been worked on since its official completion in 1931. There were damages to be repaired, visuals to be reapplied, and so on. What may surprise you is that the majority of the restorations have been completed in the last 40 years. Because the Christ the Redeemer statue underwent its first major restoration in 1980. So what happened in 1980? That would be Pope John Paul II's arrival. He was in Brazil, so the Catholic Church in the region made certain that the statue was in perfect condition for him when he arrived. Since then, the statue has undergone numerous restorations, the last one being scheduled back in 2020. But aside from the restoration done for the lightning damage, you could argue that none were more important than the restoration done for the Pope. For a long time, the only way to get to the Christ the Redeemer statue was to walk up the side of the mountain via 200 steps, which is good for exercise habits, but not so much fun if you're not in great shape. But you needed to do it to get to the statue. However, by 2003, it was clear that this was not the best idea. So they built an escalator to help get to the statue faster and with less effort on your part. But be warned, those escalators can break, which means you'll probably have to walk regardless. Regrettably, vandals and troublemakers find great pleasure in graffitiing or spray painting artwork. And while the Christ the Redeemer statue was undergoing renovation in 2010, a few of these vandals made the decision to go ahead and leave their mark. The issue with that is that there was no official response because, to be honest, it had never happened before. The mayor of Rio declared it a crime against the nation. And from that point on, anyone foolish enough to follow their lead can rightfully claim to be enemies of the state. The Christ the Redeemer statue is without a doubt one of the most popular tourist destinations in Rio de Janeiro, and for good reason. However, some people have wanted to see the statue's abilities expanded beyond its use as a tourist attraction. For that reason, a small chapel was built at the foot of the statue in 2006, the year of its official 75th birthday and anniversary, a location where you could legally wed and hold a small reception as well. Why would people want to do that, one may wonder? It's important to keep in mind that this statue is a monument to Christ, and many people get married in churches and similar settings in order to receive the blessing of God. And where better to receive that blessing than under the shadow of a massive Christ statue? Now, this location does have certain shortcomings. The chapel is very small due to its location, so large weddings cannot be held there. In addition, you will be approaching the statue in your wedding gown and suit because you must walk up to it. Therefore, make sure your prospective spouse is prepared for a hike if you believe they would enjoy having their wedding there. Despite the fact that there's an escalator, it's not the same. Thank you to everyone who watched. What are your thoughts on the details and background of the Christ the Redeemer statue located atop Rio de Janeiro? Did you discover a great deal of new information that you were previously unaware of? Is it surprising that its history is this extensive? Let me know in the comment section below. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you on the channel again soon.